Alright, you guys, it's finally that time of the year. It's finally October, which you know what that means. No, I don't mean it's time to talk about Halloween shit. It's time to talk about my number one most anticipated film of the entire year. Quite possibly my most anticipated film since, like, The Dark Knight. This was such a big moment for me, and it was such a massive, like, nerd fest to see Denis Villeneuve officially giving us his amazing recreation of Frank Herbert's classic novel, Dune. What is there to say about this film outside of so much? This video might be a little bit longer than my normal film reviews go, but that's because there's a lot to talk about, and I don't really have anything negative to say. If you have watched any of my film reviews before, or if you've even watched any of my reviews before, or anything in general, then you know that more often than not, I tend to have one or two negative things I can typically pick apart with a film, with a game, with a book, whatever the case may be. There's usually one or two things here or there that I don't necessarily think detract from the enjoyment, but I think that they're sometimes worth mentioning because it's like, okay, cool. Maybe this film or this game is phenomenal, but maybe there's just this one little nitpick that might adjust your mileage a little bit. If I had to pick one thing from Dune that might do that for you, it would be the runtime. But that being said, the fact about it is that it doesn't feel like a single second is wasted. It doesn't feel like at any point like Denis was just doing something to look cool, like he was just doing something to be bombastic, like he was just doing something to be flamboyant. It just felt like everything in the movie was needed for the story, and it feels like everything that you see and everything that you experience, everything that you hear is there for you to enjoy, but it's also there for you to connect the dots. The very short answer to this review is if you're a fan of the Frank Herbert novel and it's like one of your favorite books of all time, you will love the movie. If you didn't really read the book and you're just a sci-fi fan in general, you will love this movie. And if you're kind of a casual film goer and you don't really necessarily get into like the art aspect of it, you'll love this movie. So that's the short version of it though, but let's talk about the 4 things in this film that it does so impeccably well that I think deserves your money, if not multiple times over, because this film is phenomenal. Number 1, let's talk about the acting real quick. So anybody who is familiar with Dune and anybody who has seen the trailers and saw the promotional materials knows that this film is absolutely stacked with talent. We've got Oscar Isaac, we've got Timothée Chalamet, we've got Josh Brolin, we've got Dave Bautista, we've got Rebecca Ferguson, we've got Skarsgård, we've got Jason Momoa. There is so much talent in this film, and the brilliant part of it is nobody in this film is overstaying their welcome, and at no point do you feel like you're just seeing more footage of somebody because they have more star appeal. Like, the fact is, Oscar Isaac was a leading man in Star Wars. In Star Wars, one of the biggest franchise on the face of the planet. And he has maybe 20 minutes of combined screen time across this entire film, and the film is 2.5 hours long. Like, he really doesn't have a whole lot of screen time, and yet he's amazing in every scene that he's in. But you see his face on the cover, and you're like, oh, Oscar Isaac, he's going to be in most of this film. He's not. And they very easily could have rewritten Dune to service all of these characters and all these big name actors to have more time on screen. Dave Bautista has probably 3 minutes of screen time, and he's one of the biggest up and coming stars in the entire thing right now. Jason Momoa is a huge name right now. People adore Jason Momoa for a lot of different reasons. He's in about 20 minutes of it. But I'm getting a little bit off track. What I'm trying to say is that every single actor is used to the best of their abilities, none of them overstay their welcome, and everybody nails their character. There's 2 people in particular I'm going to shout out here in just a minute, but let me just say this. There is no bad acting in this film. Period. Everybody kills their role. Oscar Isaac kills it. Dave Bautista kills it. Timothée Chalamet kills it. Everybody in this film kills it. But there's 2 in particular, as I said, that I need to shout out. Number 1 is Jason Momoa. So I've said this, I think, in a couple of videos before. I love Jason Momoa as a personality. I think he has a very infectious personality. And I do think that he kind of gets short-sighted in a lot of his films. He tends to get a little bit sidelined. Like, Aquaman's actually, unironically, one of my favorite superhero films that I've seen in a long time. It is such an infectiously outrageous amount of fun, and James Wan's visual style is so cathartic and kinetic that, like, I genuinely think Aquaman gets way too much hate. I think it's an awesome film, but I don't feel like Jason Momoa got to shine all that much in it. In this film, not only does he get to shine, but he shines for all of his combined 15 to 20 minutes, as opposed to the fact that he was in a 2-hour long film. You know what I'm saying? Like, you like Jason Momoa more in his 20 minutes of Dune then you've probably liked him in his entire career. Jason Momoa is awesome in this film, and him being cast as Duncan Idaho just feels like he crawled inside the character of Duncan Idaho and just embodied him. It was everything I wanted to see from Duncan Idaho from the books. The second person I gotta shout out, and this one surprised the hell out of me, Rebecca Ferguson. So I only really know Rebecca Ferguson from the Mission Impossible movies. If I'm being completely honest with you, I know her from a few other things here and there, but like when you say Rebecca Ferguson, my mind immediately goes to Mission Impossible. That's just the first character that pops to my mind, and it's very difficult thing to get over, right? When you start to associate an actor so much with a personal franchise, it becomes very difficult for you to unsee that character. A really good example of this is anytime I see somebody from Lord of the Rings in a different film, whether that's Ian McKellen, whether that's Viggo Mortensen, not so much Viggo Mortensen because he's done a lot of really good stuff, people like Elijah Wood or Sean Astin or Orlando Bloom, like it's very difficult for me to not see their Lord of the Rings characters, and sometimes it can actually even ruin my film experience every now and then. I think this is going to become the definitive way that I see Rebecca Ferguson. She is absolutely stellar in this film. I was incredibly surprised. Not only is she stellar, but she's the best person in this film right now. The fact that I actually walked out of the theater like thinking it over in my head and going, who did I like most in that film? And the fact that I kept coming to the solution or the conclusion that it was Rebecca Ferguson, the more surprised I got, because I've just never thought Rebecca Ferguson as somebody that would steal the limelight like that. But she does, and she's amazing. She has this super vulnerable character who, like, this is one of the first times in a film that I've actually been convinced that the actor was actually crying on set. She was so well cast and completely chews up every scene that she's in. I cannot praise Rebecca Ferguson enough. So moving on from the acting, let's talk about the two particular things that I think sell this movie more so than I was expecting it to. Number one is the CGI. This is kind of a rare thing for me to talk about, and it goes hand in hand with art design and art direction. I have a really big hang up with a lot of CGI in films and in TV series. I'm not going to talk about how much I dislike the CGI in Marvel films because I've talked about it before, but let me explain for a very brief second why I dislike CGI in major franchises so much most often. When I watch something like The Force Awakens, or I watch something like the Loki TV series, or I watch something like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or I watch something like Batman v Superman, I have this really big hang up of like seeing the CGI and seeing the green screen effects and just feeling like there's no depth to them, like feeling like I couldn't walk up and touch these objects, which I realize you can't, but it's something that was missing from some movies like Rogue One, for example, where it just feels like you could walk up and touch the Star Destroyer. There's so much texture and depth to them that you actually feel like they exist in the world with the characters. It's something that a lot of sci-fi films really don't get nowadays, and it's why I feel particularly relieved when a film like Ad Astra comes along, where I'm like, okay, is this like an amazing film? Maybe not, but I feel like they actually inhabit this world, and I feel like these space stations and these spaceships actually exist in the world with them, and that they're not just an effect that's just copy pasted onto every single frame. The thing with Dune is that this is the most involved and heavy, like, depth perception CGI I've seen that I can think of. Outside of like, I don't even really know. I don't know necessarily how to explain it. It's something that you have to experience. Nothing in this film looks cheap when it comes to the CGI, when it comes to the art direction, the costume design, the ship design. Everything feels like it just has this, not this gritty feeling to it, but it has just this feeling of like you could walk up into the screen and touch these things and feel these spaceships and climb inside them. Now again, I realize how cheesy that can sound, and I realize some people will hear that and they will just kind of go, okay, but like, that sounds like a personal hang up. I think people who understand what I'm saying are going to really connect with me on this one, because Dune just feels like a universe you could be a part of. I have not had that feeling since like The Phantom Menace in 1999. It has been a long time since I've had that feeling from a sci-fi film. So, jumping straight into my last two topics, the cinematography and the music. Let's do the cinematography first. It should come as no surprise that this film is an absolute looker from start to finish. Denis Villeneuve has a way of just pouring the heart and soul of his cinematographer's dreams into his films, and this one is no exception. But I dare say it is his best looking one, next to Blade Runner 2049, and even then it gives it some runs for its money. It is a flooring film to look at. It is gorgeous. And I don't just mean in terms of like the scope, I don't just mean in terms of like the grand ambition of it all, although it has that in spades. It's also just a gorgeous film in terms of its color correction and in terms... I didn't realize that my lights turned off halfway through this shoot. So I didn't realize that my light turned off halfway through recording this video, but I refuse to go back and fix it. So even though it has all of that in spades, this film just has just this certain like color grade to it that just looks phenomenal. I was kind of worried that it was going to have like an almost overly fantasy kind of look to it, because that seems to kind of be the niche right now, if you know what I mean. Like sometimes you get films like The Hunger Games where you're like, this looks almost too bleak, like they wanted it to be all gritty and realistic, and then they just kind of like color graded it to shit. And then sometimes you get films like King Arthur Legend of the Sword where you're like, okay, this looks really cool, but at the same time it's so oversaturated it borders on like tension headache inducing. Happy to say that isn't the case with Dune, obviously. And also you have to shout out though to Greg Fraser, because he's the one who did the cinematography for the film, and he just absolutely killed it. He worked on films before like Rogue One and like Vice, so he's already very familiar with making really clean looking images and making these really epic, grandiose looking shots, but he outdid himself in this film. Absolutely phenomenal work. So the last thing that we wanted to talk about in this, and the last thing that was important of note, which should come as no surprise to anybody if you've been following any of the interviews about this film, but Hans Zimmer's music absolutely just slaps in this film. It is by far, in my personal opinion, the best work that Hans Zimmer has done, period. It's a very, very, very close tie between this and Interstellar, but for me, there's something about just the authenticity and the grit of this soundtrack it transcends Interstellar in a few different ways, in my opinion. I'm not going to go out of my way to claim that it's his best he's ever done, because obviously the man's still alive. He still has plenty of other films that he can make, so he could very well outdo himself. But the reason that I mention this specifically is because I was super concerned about this soundtrack going into it, because Hans Zimmer actually worked on 2 films previous to this. He worked on Wonder Woman 1984, and he worked on James Bond's 007 No Time to Die. So he had already worked on 2 films prior to this, and everybody went into those films expecting some sort of a banger soundtrack. And if you've watched any of my other videos, then you know that obviously that was not the case, and you also know that we kind of called Hans Zimmer out for it a couple times, because we were like, you basically just reused your tracks and you didn't really make anything new. It was kind of a big bummer. But the reason that happened, and the reason why there wasn't really anything original in those 2 soundtracks, is because he was working so hard on Dune, and he became so obsessed with making it an especially great soundtrack that he just genuinely didn't really have the time to do anything else. Ironically enough, that's also why he didn't do the Tenet soundtrack, despite the fact that he did every single Christopher Nolan movie prior to that. It was the only film that he hadn't done, because he was so dedicated to making Dune special that he just wasn't able to do it. He wasn't able to commit to it. He was just so engrossed in it. And I think that really is the best way to describe Dune. Everything about this film is engrossing. The cinematography is engrossing. The art design, the ship design, the way that the world feels lived in, the way that it feels like you could walk out and actually step onto one of these spaceships is engrossing. The way that every actor is just giving it their all and feels like they completely embody these characters is engrossing. The way that the music just hits at all the right times and the way that it's so unique is engrossing. The whole film is so resplendent and so just breath of fresh air in such a crowded, oversaturated market that it just feels like this came at just the right time. Yes, you could probably argue that it might be a little bit frustrating to somebody who says, okay, but Dune is basically just setting up a sequel that we haven't even had confirmed yet. The fact of the matter is, guys, we know there's going to be a sequel. There's no way that there couldn't be, outside of like this film literally making no money, and if my theater was any indication, this film's going to make back its budget in the weekend. So I personally don't really think that's a valid criticism to throw at the film, because to me that's the exact same logic as seeing The Fellowship of the Ring when it first came out and going, yeah, you know what, this film looks great, sounds great, has great acting, has a great world, has a great fantasy setting, does everything right, but it sets up a sequel, and I feel like we didn't get there at the right time, so I'm going to give this film a 5 out of 10. That's kind of the same logic I'm seeing a lot of people apply to Dune, and I think it's completely unwarranted, because this film does everything so right, and not only does it do everything so right, but it does it so confidently that it's kind of impossible not to just be mesmerized by the whole experience. My brother described it as like watching a poem in motion. My other sibling described it as like just experiencing Star Wars for the first time all over again. My other sibling and friend described it as like watching Star Wars as somebody who wanted to be a little bit more intellectually moved by it. Obviously, saying this all out loud, if you've read the book, then you should already be expecting this. But if you haven't read the book, this right now, there's only one other film that could possibly transcend it for me, but right now, this is my film of the year. Dune is perfect. So thanks for watching the video, guys. If you did enjoy this review, be sure to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought of Dune. Obviously, it's the big movie right now. Everyone else is all talking about it. It's absolutely fantastic and well worth your money. So be sure to tell us what you thought of it if you've seen it already, or if you are planning on seeing it. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video if you haven't, and we will talk to you next time.